original sample.
This project was kind of an exploration into how good I could make a song sound only using a single sample for all instruments. So this is where I started. I recorded this on a Google Pixel 5, not very high quality. You can hear some noise in the background and stuff.
EQ the bowl.
First things first, what I wanted to do is clean up the original sample with some EQ, especially for the tone layers. I didn't want a bunch of the weird resonances, so I just kind of cut them out. I added a fundamental boost and then cut some resonances, cut the lows. Second EQ is boosting a little bit of mids, notching out this, cutting a little bit of highs, more notches. So EQ'd, it sounds like this. Once I had that, I resampled it, and then I can deactivate this track and all of the plugins to save CPU.
The snare.
This one gave me some trouble. I started by layering the root as well as an octave down, just to add a little bit of pitch density. Ran it through the quick sampler. So you can see the attack envelope here, filter envelope here, and the pitch envelope here. Started with an EQ, cutting some of the lows, boosting a fundamental a little bit, cutting out some of the mid-range and boosting the highs. Second EQ is doing a little bit more of a harsh low cut and cutting out some resonances here. This is a trick that I like to use whenever I have a really artificial sounding instrument, especially percussion or drums. I load up the Space Designer plugin in Logic. In this case, I chose Small Hall, and I'm doing a really short volume envelope, cutting off most of the tail of the reverb, and I'm blending it pretty low in this case. And what this does is it blends in more realistic sounding room, but it doesn't add a reverb tail. So the output EQ, I'm just cutting some of the lows and a little bit of high, throwing it through a vintage FET compressor. This is just the stock compressor in Logic. I use this for almost everything in this track. I really like the sound of this. You can see my settings here, 3.7 ratio, slow release, fairly fast attack, but still letting some transient through. And then I'm using the soft distortion on the way out. It's also going to a snare bus with a really low threshold, 2.5 ratio. This one has a fast release, trying to bring out some of this sustain, also distorting it a little bit more on the way out. That sounds like this. That is the tone layer of the snare. There's also a noise layer, which is trying to recreate the snare wires. So I pitched it up, really short amp envelope. Filter envelope is doing a little bit of like high to low, just bringing out the transient. I'm also doing a little bit of pitch modulation with the LFO here. This is also the original bowl sample. This is not the EQ'd resampled bowl. So I'm running it through a ring shifter, which makes it sound a little bit wobbly, adding distortion, a bit crusher, doing some downsampling, mostly adding drive. Mix is pretty high. I chose the clip mode. And then I'm cutting the lows and most of the mids. All I really wanted was this upper frequency range. I'm doing the same reverb trick, even shorter decay because it's a shorter sound. Blending it a little bit higher this time. And I'm using a compressed hall. Cutting a lot of lows, and then I'm boosting some 3.7. And with the snare bus compressor, this is also going to that bus. It sounds like this. And then both of them together. I resampled that over here. I loaded it into Quick Sampler again. This is the resampled snare with the noise layer and the fundamental layer all processed. Here's the amp envelope. Here's the filter envelope. throwing some drive on it. Here's the EQ, so boosting some fundamentals and mids, cutting some of the lows. I'm compressing it even more with the FET compressor. 2.7, 32 millisecond attack, 43 millisecond release. That's also going to the sidechain bus, so pretty much all of the instruments in this session are going to be sidechained by the kick and the snare, just making room for kick and snare in a really dense arrangement. It's also going to the drum bus, which is doing a little bit of compression, and then it's also being saturated. So that's the main snare.
the rim,
For the first section of the song, where the drums come in, I also wanted a rim, something a little different than the snare, something higher pitched and more punchy. So what I did there is I took the resampled snare, shortened it with the amp envelope. I also did the same doubling trick here, except I did it up the octave this time because it's kind of a higher pitched sound. And then there's a little flam here as well. It's also slightly pitched up. So with the EQ, I basically cut out almost all of the fundamental and a lot of the low end. I boosted 1.5K. There's a resonance here I didn't like. Saturated it pretty heavily. Added a compressor. I think this is kind of just adding sustain. Couple notches. There was a bit too much high frequency, so I dipped that. That sounds like this. So that's the processing folder. Here's the rim resample in the quick sampler. Here's the EQ. I decided I took out too much of the low end, so I boosted some of it back up. A little high pass, low pass. This is going to a delay, which is saturation, tape delay, and tremolo. Quarter note with some smoothing, only 35% depth, but it's just to add some stereo back and forth. Again, that's also going to the drum bus, which is being lightly compressed and saturated even more.
Snare and Rim Variations.
With the snare and the rim samples, there's quite a lot of different combinations throughout the songs for different sections. The rim was initially for the A section here when the drums come in. Then it moves to snare when the arrangement gets a little bit more dense. But there's also some combinations later. So for this section, I'm using both the snare and the rim. I am actually pitching it around a little bit as well. Up the octave here. So that sounds like this. As the arrangement progresses, it gets more and more intense, at least for this section. So that's why I wanted both snare and rim layered together. There's also snare 2. This layer is the snare resample. I have a crazy reverb going on. I have it blended quite low. This is just the snare but pitched down, which kind of adds some low end energy to the snare. I'm compressing it. Here are the settings. I'm cutting off most of the attack because I want that to come from the other snare and the rim. I'm mostly just getting the tail end of it to add some girth to the signal. And then I'm also doing a reverse reverb. It's blended really low. So there's a regular reverb, which is Valhalla. Here are the settings. I'm also sidechaining that reverb to the kick. So the reverb is not getting in the way when the kick hits. Immediate attack, 190 millisecond release, and then 3.2 for the ratio. Drums all together in this section. Sounds like this. Just the snares. So if I take this out, this rim is also just adding those delays. That's one of the main reasons I have it here. And then this is adding bottom end fatness. And then over here, I'm layering the original snare and the rim, but this snare is up the octave. So here's the root, and it's up here. So that sounds like this. At the very end, I'm adding back in the second snare just for the last two notes. I think it's because I like the tail of the snare too. And this is like kind of a verbed out decay ending. So it just fit.
The kick.
The kick was quite a bit easier than the snare was. Didn't have to mess with it quite as much to make it sound decent. So I started with the EQ'd bowl sound. I'm cutting off some of the beginning of that. There was just a bit too much noise in this area of the sample. This attack envelope is not exactly what I used. This is actually for the 808. You can see it's got pretty long decay here, but this part is going to be the same for both the 808 and the kick. I didn't, unfortunately, preserve the kick processing. I just processed the 808 on the same track and changed everything. So sorry about that. The filter envelope is doing a very fast high to low cut, very fast decay as well, 51 milliseconds. I'm adding drive. The pitch envelope is doing a lot, 429 cents down within 40 milliseconds. It just makes it sound like a kick. So that's what this sounds like. Again, the actual kick resample is significantly shorter decay than that. Boosting some fundamental, cutting some mids, cutting some highs. So this is for the 808. I'm basically using this EQ as a resonator. It extends the sustain of the fundamental pitch without affecting the rest of the frequencies. There's also a notch here, but this is for the 808. And then I'm running it through a saturator. This bypass feature is very important if you want to saturate a kick, because with it off, sounds like that, kind of like a laser. And then with it on, sounds like that. I'm also running it through a compressor, of course, pretty high ratio, slow attack, fast release, and then soft distortion on the way out. Once that was resampled, I did a little bit more processing on it. So in the sampler, you can see the kick is significantly shorter. The 808 was like 500 something milliseconds long. This is only 158. Filter envelope is not doing anything here. Adding some drive. For the EQ, I'm boosting some of the sub frequency. This is 31, very low. There was a couple notches in the low mids that I didn't like. And then this is kind of the attack frequency range for kicks. This is at least where I like it. You can go a little bit higher or lower depending on the timbre that you're looking for out of your kick attack. That is then going through some pretty heavy saturation, again, bypass the fundamental frequency so it doesn't sound like a laser. And then that's going through a compressor again, 3.1 ratio, 26 attack, very fast release, not distorting on the way out. It's got enough distortion already. And then, of course, that's going to the drum bus for some light compression and more saturation. That's the end result.
The 808.
For the 808, it's very similar to the kick other than that resonator. Basically the kick, but much, much longer. You can see with the attack envelope here. Filter envelope, again, not doing anything. I already did all this. Adding some drive. I had to fine tune it to make sure it was in key. And then I'm cutting out tons and tons of high end. And then I'm boosting just generally the low end. I also have the kick playing here, so I didn't want the attack to come from the 808. The attack is coming from the kick in this situation. I'm also sidechaining it to the kick. So when the kick attacks, it's going to duck the entire signal of the 808. I did this for a couple reasons. One is I wanted the attack that I got from the original kick, but I wanted the sustain of the 808 here. And then the other reason is both of them have a ton of low end. And if I had them both playing at the same time, it would just be way too much. So the kick will duck out the 808. You can see it's pretty much immediate attack and then 45 millisecond release. So the 808 fades in as the original kick is fading out. Of course, that's also going to the drum bus. So just the 808 will sound like this. And then with the kick as well, it sounds like this.